So Nick has been involved in ELT for, I believe, more than 30 years as a teacher trainer and as a materials writer. He's worked all over the world, Latin America, Europe, the Middle East, Southeast Africa, North Africa. And one thing that's really special, he has written a lot of different course books for Macmillan. Winners, Evolution, Sunrise, Stepping Up. But his most recent publication is Level 1 of an international primary course, Share It. So in this session, Nick will use examples from Share It to look at teaching techniques that we can use to get the maximum involvement from all our students so they all feel included in our lessons. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Nick. Nick, I was going to say good luck, but you don't need it. I know that. Enjoy your session and see you later.
Okay, right. See you then. Right, hello everybody, and thanks very much for signing up. It's amazing how many people are coming through, and I've just seen a couple of people there say that that they know me from other sessions. There was somebody who knew me in Argentina. Ah, fantastic! It's really nice to see you all again. Okay, really good. Right, now then, let's move on with today's session. I'd like to move on, but I can't. Ah, there we are. Right. An inclusive classroom culture. Right, sounds a little bit kind of wordy. Oh, what's all that about? This is not going to be difficult theoretical stuff. You know, a lot of kind of practical ideas. But of course, first to talk about what does an inclusive classroom culture mean? It's kind of sounds like the sort of thing that we should have, but what does it actually mean? So we're going to talk a little bit about that, how ideas can actually do to create the wonderful inclusive classroom culture. Right. I imagine, before we start, I imagine quite a lot of you are kind of teaching in sort of lockdown conditions, maybe have the students separated in class, or in fact you might even be doing all your teaching online, the students in their homes and so on. I won't be dealing much with the online classes, because actually the coming after mine is going to be a little bit more of that online situations. I'll try to adapt some of these situations, these games, activities, etc., that we've got in the talk to the current situation on for quite a long time, how we can make it difficult, easier in this rather difficult situation. Right, but generally just get an idea of what we can do about the famous inclusive classroom culture. Right, so let's get a little example there. Right, I took a little photo of all, well, that's not all the seeds, but quite a lot of seeds, vegetables and so on this year. Put them on the floor, took a photo. They're all mixed up, they're all over the place. I don't know what's happening, I don't know where they are. I can't even really see all half of them, right? And if we imagine like those are just our students and they're all mixed up like that, that's not really working for everybody. It's working for some of the ones up, they're a little lost actually in most all the things. Have something a little bit more organized. There we are, them all nicely arranged. You have to get them all working together and learning together. Now, in the case of the little seed packets, it means putting them all nicely arranged in order. But obviously we're not going to do that with our students, but we need to get them all in a situation where they can all be participating in the class, all something out of the class. Very often, actually, in every class, for lots of different reasons, students who aren't quite so involved in the actual process of what's going on, they kind of feel like they're a little bit, whoops, let me jump 2 pages, let's not go there. Right. They feel a little bit, as we say in the example, the inclusivity, people who might otherwise be excluded or marginalized. And a lot of people in the class, whether they're little in junior 2, 3, 4, 5, perhaps 3, 4, 5, perhaps, or certainly in teenagers' times, then they might be actually feeling a little bit excluded, a little bit marginalized. Lots of different reasons. We'll have a quick talk about what those reasons can be. In schools, it's actually very hard to specify exactly what all those reasons are, but are quite a lot. We'll get a general idea of what those problems are, how we can help it. Pull everybody together, pull the whole class together, working on the same activities in the same way, getting the same kind of enjoyment out of it. Remember that in the back, that the it's always got to be in our heads that the English class should be enjoyable. It's one of the few classes you can always make, almost always, enjoyable. Exams, that's a bit of a problem, but apart from that, the class can be really enjoyable. It's one of those classes which the students can spend quite a bit of time laughing. That goes for adults as well. When they're learning a language, there's always laughter in the classroom of a good type because they're enjoying themselves. What we want for all the students, we want to try and include those ones who might feel excluded or marginalized. Right. Let's get some ideas there. We say, oh, a typical classroom, but lots of students. What about? But it's not really like that, is it? No classroom is actually like that with all the students looking like that. Just to go back a little bit in my experience of teaching, for a long, long while, I was teaching at an international school in Mexico. I went to school or anything, but anyway, it's a great, fantastic place. I was working there for quite a long time. Actually, I was teaching computing and information technology and doing English classes, like mixing the two. And had those extreme examples of students who felt kind of excluded or marginalized in the class. So it was a school that had people, it had a certain number of locals, of Mexican students there. Their parents decided to send them to this school. The majority of people actually came from any other countries in the world. Usually they're over to work there, some companies and so on. Were working there, or one parent was working there in Mexico. So the children came along and they had to start in this new school. And as a result, because they came from literally all over, like people, the list here of where these people have come from, all review, there were so many, we ended up with one at various points, 32 different languages being spoken. And you would get one student who was the only person in the school who spoke a particular language, and the student who spoke another particular language, and nobody could actually understand each. So everything had to be in English. Of course, some of them never even spoken English either. So we ended up with really quite a tricky situation, as often happens in that kind of school, where there are so many different things. Now, these are examples, the sort of issues, the kind of marginalization issue. A lot of them had problems they had, they didn't feel they were included. Some of these would apply to not just general schools in any country. Some would apply more to international schools. I've got mainly the general ones, but just as an example, I've taken this little student up at the top. You see, where it says 15 years old, has lived in 14 countries. Now, that's the sort of student we were dealing with, where their parents were going from one country to working one job, then to another job, then to another job, then to another job. And the poor children had to go along all the time and change and change and change and never stay long in place. That is one particular student, the most 16 years old, lived in 14 countries. God, can you imagine? Right. But equally, with the problems all over the place, like students perhaps with ADHD, attention disorder, activity disorder. I find it difficult to be included, or when they do try to get included, they actually feel that people are kind of turning against them because they've actually got a different kind of approach. We've got a little bit further across there, we got autistic. This is something that's becoming more and more and teachers rather, becoming more and more aware of it, that actually there is a huge range of autism, so from the rather difficult to the kind of extreme end, right the way up to the high-functioning autistic person who is actually could be me or anybody who just has certain ways of sometimes don't always fit in very well with the class. So people like that, the high-functioning ones, often do very well perhaps in some activities where they know exactly what they want, for example. But when they're actually dealing with something like learning English, it's more difficult for them actually to fit in sometimes. So that's one problem perhaps. Then you might have somebody who is dyspraxic or dyslexic, or as we did actually in one case, I had one student with Tourette's syndrome. I don't know if anybody here has come across that. Quite an unusual thing, manifests itself in lots of different ways, just something you're born with. Oh, hang on, I'm just going to look over here. Have we got a problem with the connection in some way? Looks like some people are having problems connecting.
We have solved it, Nick. Keep going. Thank you for checking.
If you've got any questions afterwards, you can ask me. Things you missed out on, perhaps. Right, let's try again. So I was saying with Tourette's syndrome, they find it sometimes very difficult to control what they're actually doing. So it might just be rather strange actions which they do in class. Again, rather difficult for the for the other students to deal with. They kind of push the people like that away. Sometimes, I'm thinking particularly the one that we had at the school where I was working. So this young boy, really nice lad and very clever and so on, but sometimes suddenly starts shouting quite extraordinary things, really very odd. Now, it's very difficult to run a class when you've got somebody doing that, somebody who has to be accepted as that's what he'll do, but nobody else can behave like that. So all of these things tend to lead to a kind of isolation, yes, a kind of being excluded from the class, marginalization in the class. All of those things. I've left some blank because I had some other things there, which were situations that evolved, sometimes between two students where awful things like their two countries they came from were at war and that sort of thing. So I haven't actually put those in, and I don't think we need to talk about them because I don't imagine those are situations you're dealing with in most cases, I hope, but you may be. But in any case, what we really, really want to do is to actually pull all these people together, include them in the class, be inclusive about all of them, because they're all in some way or other feeling a little bit marginalized in the class. Now, I can't actually go through each particular case, say, well, if somebody's dyspraxic, what you need to do is this and this. And if somebody has Asperger's syndrome, what you need to do is this or this or this. I can't, it's difficult to deal with everybody differently in the class. What we need is activities, as far as possible, that can pull the class together. Maybe not for the whole time in the classroom, but for some of the time. All right, so what we're going to look at is some ideas for that, for pulling the whole class together so all the students feel involved and are involved. Right, we certainly want to avoid this, where everybody is all the same, because everybody in the class is different. They've all got their own little situations, their own problems, their own things they're good at, their own things they're not so good at, different moods. We've got people here, students here of every single type in that little picture there. And that's really how it is. You may not notice it when you first see them, but this is what's happening, the underlying picture. So let's have a little look at that. We need to look at three areas which can really help to pull the class together. Those three areas are here. That's how we interact with the students, our teaching style, and our classroom activities. That's three different areas. As far as possible, we'll look at all of those. Right, so on with the first one, how we interact with the students. Right, we've got, I think the main problem here is avoid tribes in your class. Now, I don't know if you actually do, or if you, I'm sure you probably do, how aware they make themselves in the class, but in any level, from primary to secondary, even to extent with adults, you get these little groups, don't you? You can either call them tribes or cliques, as some people like to call them, where you've got there's one little set of students. It might be just 3 students who are perhaps the sporty ones, and 2 students or 4 students who are the cool ones, and 3 other students who are the clever ones. And they kind of sometimes keep together in their little tribes, which is okay for them, but it means there's not much contact between the tribe, and there are other people who are actually not involved in anything. Those are the ones who are feeling completely marginalized. They're just not involved in what's happening in the class because of these little tribes. So we can't tell them to stop it. We can't just push them all together. Just doesn't really work. It means people don't work properly together and causes resentment and so on. So we need to somehow give them some situations where actually tribes is no longer important. They're just all working together on something, or all expressing their opinions on something. Right, another one, so we'll look at an activity for that in a minute. Another thing in the interacting with the class is about time to breathe. Now here I'm really talking about these kind of mindfulness situations, which are now very, very popular and a real aid in many ways to teaching, to really creating a good atmosphere in the class. I don't want to take anything kind of too complicated or whatever, too difficult to explain for the parents thinking what on earth is going on in the class, but something very simple like this little time to breathe activity, that is something that we'll look at in a minute, and we'll find that I think that's a way we can handle it very well. And also be what you want your students to be, and we'll talk about that in detail in a minute. So let's look at tribes first of all. Moving on, we want to avoid tribes in the class. Right, it's really difficult to have an inclusive classroom culture when there are tribes or cliques, whichever you want to say, in the classroom. It kind of goes against the whole idea of inclusivity, of getting people working together. It's like little groups which don't really want to mix with each other. Now, inevitably, students are going to be like that a lot of the time, and they like being with their friends, with their little peer group, so we can't really change it all the time, but we must make them open to times when they are kind of all together as a group. Now, one very simple little activity, which I should say is really only suitable at the moment if you haven't got a kind of lockdown situation, if you're not having students isolated in the classroom or whatever. So this is for a other days situation, and we'll talk about how we could modify it for the current situation. Right, so it's little who likes games, very simple, yeah, nothing complicated about it at all. Right, so basically in a classroom in normal times, one side of the classroom is yes, the other side of the classroom is no, and all you're going to be doing is asking them questions with who likes hamburgers, who likes Taylor Swift, who likes Harry Potter books, etc., etc., etc. Anything that's kind of popular that the students will have opinions about, something that's relevant to their age group. Yes, this one might be more around the 10, 11 age group. Okay, perhaps a little bit younger for some of them, a little bit older for some of them. All depends. Just you'll be choosing any questions, kind of make a little list of types of food they can think about, types of singers or music they can think about, and types of books or films or whatever. They can actually give anything. They're giving their opinion about whether they like it or not. Right. So, for example, I say to the whole class, okay, who likes hamburgers? And for all the class, if it's yes, they go to one side, and if it's no, they go to the other. Okay, and they all stand up and move to that side. Okay, everybody's standing there. Now that's just the beginning. So you mix them all up a bit, because in any of those little tribes, some of them are going to like hamburgers and some of them might not. Maybe everybody likes hamburgers. You choose some other food that's a little bit more. Got to make a decision, but we'll use hamburgers for the moment. So some of the tribe will be in the yes area and some will be in the no area. all of those people who feel excluded and so on, they're going to be in the yes area or the no area. They're going to be part of the group as well. Suddenly, you've got a completely different group. Now, it's not enough just to have people separated like that. That doesn't bring a class together. But what does bring them together as a new group, the yes group or the no group, we then actually make them want to do things together. So, for example, okay, the students move to the yes or no side of the class, and then, and this is the one that really makes it a whole thing, a whole kind of class activity or a little group activity. They say, we like or we don't like chorally. So they all say together, we like hamburgers, and all together, we don't like hamburgers. They become a new kind of group. They've got their own little inclusion things. This is great for the students who weren't actually part of a group before. Suddenly, they are part of a group. It means just this makes the tiny little bit of a difference, but it means that everybody has been included in a group. So they're all kind of talking to each other or laughing together, all chorally saying, we like hamburgers, or we don't like hamburgers, or whatever it is. You try that with 5 or 6 perhaps activities. So they do one, they'll go and sit down, you ask another question. Who likes Harry Potter books? Okay, and they all move yes or no, and then they all say chorally, we like Harry Potter, or we don't like Harry Potter, whatever. So you can choose anything that's relevant to them. The important bit is doing the choral talk so that they all get involved together. They all form this new group, which includes lots of people who were not part of any group before. Suddenly, we've kind of just temporarily broken down the little tribes or cliques, and we've got 2 new, completely different ones, and everybody's involved. Right. So that's one little activity. Sorry, I should say, of course, when you've got a pandemic, as we have at the moment, you can't really have students running around the classroom and all getting together in a little group and all shouting, we like hamburgers and we don't like hamburgers, which is a pity. In many things, we can't do lots of really nice activities. It might be some of you are teaching in schools where you can actually still do that because of the situation in the country. Others might actually be having really quite strict situations where the students are just sitting in one place at a distance from each other. I'm sure a lot of you are doing that, and they can't move or anything. It's still nice to try and get something like that going, because in that situation, the students who are the ones who are feeling kind of excluded from the class are feeling even more than they did. A quick variation, which I did just now, was if you've got a situation like that, obviously you can't have a no side and a yes side, but you can give all the students a no sign or a yes sign, okay? So you'd show all those signs, each student would get no or yes, and then they're all sitting in their places, and you say, who likes hamburgers? Okay, and they say yes, okay, and they hand up their people who put yes, say, yes, we like hamburgers. Yeah. And then you say, and no, the other people in the other set say, no, we don't like hamburgers. No. Right. And in that way, they are actually they're forming their own little group. Of course, it's not the same because they're not really there, but it still works. It's still, because inevitably, with any group, people will be looking around when they put up their, yes, we like hamburgers, they'll be looking around to see who says yes, because those people are part of this new group, okay? Somebody said give the cards in 2 different colors. Yes, you could do, absolutely. It's just only had a piece of yellow paper, that's why. But yes, perhaps yellow for yes, and I don't know, red for no or blue for no, whatever you like, absolutely fine. And then actually these little cards are really very good to have in any classroom, just getting people to put things up. It's just a great way of getting people involved. In this activity, we're still sort of managing to form a little bit of cohesive groups, new groups, not the tribe groups. And it does help a bit, but it's better if they can all stand up and all shout together, because then they are genuinely like that, a group. Right. Now then, let's see what else we've got. Okay, On to time to breathe. Right. Now, I think some students are already using some of the ideas of mindfulness and so on in their classroom. In some parts of the world, actually, I think in Thailand and so on, some of these activities have been essential in a lot of classrooms, perhaps all classrooms, for a long time now. I'm talking about many, many years, and it's a really great thing. Now, obviously, if you're doing something like that, we don't need to worry about simple things like this. This is really just like a starter activity for perhaps some teachers who might think, I don't know about this. This all sounds a little bit, I don't know. This is a really, really simple activity, which I've seen people do. I've done myself. And it's a great way of working with a group to calm things down a bit. I notice when I'm talking about this activity, I calm down a bit, actually. I do tend to talk normally too fast, too many things and so on. And here, actually, I'm calming down even as I start talking about it. And all we're going to be doing is just breathing, basically. So in between any type of activity, only once, just a few minutes, only once in the class, in that period. I mean, obviously the next class you could do it again, or maybe to do it every 3 or 4 classes, whatever. It's not all the time, but quite frequent. Yeah, particularly when you feel the students are just kind of going away a bit, getting a bit lost, perhaps the minds are wandering and so on. A nice, quiet activity like this actually helps them to kind of just reset things, get going again. So basically, all you're doing, you ask the students to follow your examples. You breathe slowly, deeply and calmly, and you're moving your hands. I think the best way, what works for me, is if you kind of go up as you breathe in, like, and down as you go out. And this really works well, I think. It works well on me. Look, I've calmed down a bit, really calmed down. I'm even kind of almost talking as if it's all nice and quiet. I think this really, really helps the students in so many ways because the class calms down. If they're feeling a bit tired and fractious, it's a moment of relaxation. If there's some problem, they can just forget it. And then you can actually start on a new activity. I said not all the students will immediately follow exactly what you want, but you're just going to carry on. As I say here, if a student gets distracted, watch them kindly, yes, and peacefully as you continue to breathe, yes. So I'm going, and it's really interesting. If you do that to a student, they do tend to stop doing what they were doing. They kind of look at you and you look at them, but kindly, nicely. There's no need to reprimand somebody. That goes completely against the point of what we're doing here. And generally, they will at least stop kind of wandering around with their eyes and looking at things. Quite often they find themselves, almost they can't help it, they find themselves doing the same thing, moving their hands. We want all the students to move their hands up and down. Now that's a really, really simple activity. It's an absolute starter activity for this whole kind of mindfulness ideas, but it works so well. It's quite extraordinary how it works, not just for the students, kind of bringing them all together as a group who are simply breathing. It's a great idea. What does your group do? Oh, breathe. Yeah? Well, there's different ways of breathing. It's great for the teacher too, because goodness, I know how tired and exhausted we can all get. Just doing that can make everybody, any teacher, any adult, any child, feel a little bit calmer, a little bit more able to deal with things the way they are. So then quietly you stop the activity, yes, just go, and then you carry on. Okay, it's very simple. If you're interested in that sort of thing, I think some of you have mentioned things like this that perhaps you're already using in class. You can perhaps give us some ideas later on. There are lots of more advanced activities that can really kind of take a bit longer. Of course, we don't really want to spend too much time because you've got an awful lot of things to do in the English class, and the more time you've got them speaking English and writing English, etc., the better. But basically, with a little activity like this, every now and then, say once in each class, once every 2 or 3 classes, it actually gets the students working much better in a much more kind of productive way. Right, okay, so that's one thing about sort of little activities we can do to help the students, how they feel. Basically, so they all, for one moment in the class, just feel, peace. Excellent. And we carry on to the next. Right. Now, this is a really, I think, absolutely key one, and in some ways it's the most difficult one, in this question of actually bringing everybody together. Because you want, I think this is fair enough, these are ones I would choose. What do you want your students to be? Well, enthusiastic, polite, friendly, positive, kind, helpful. And I'd say, yeah, I mean, I think those are the ones I thought of. Might be you can come up with some other things. I don't know about clever. You might want them to be clever, but you can't really force them to be. But we can, with some influence, get them to be enthusiastic, polite, friendly, positive, kind, and helpful. How do we do that? Because if we just say, hey, be enthusiastic, be friendly, be this, if we're telling them off, if we're being critical of them, then we're going exactly against what we're saying. Basically, if you want your students to be these things, then you have got to be those things. If you want your students to be enthusiastic, then you must be enthusiastic. Yeah? If you want them to be polite, then you must be polite. Friendly, you must be friendly. Maybe not exactly in the same way. The way a teacher performs, of course, is different to the way that the students will perform. But it's the same idea about being positive, about being kind, about being helpful. And it's quite easy to stray away from that. But actually, sometimes, as so often happens, we're tired. It's the third class of the afternoon or something. Oh gosh, I don't know where I am. What level is this? Oh, they're so difficult, etc., etc., etc. And of course, we can feel like that, but we can't help it sometimes. But when we're actually dealing with the students, that's when we've got to be more like what we want them to be, not like the way we are feeling at the moment. Yes, these are things you don't really want to share with the students. Yes, you don't want to say, I am exhausted, I am so tired, I don't know what to do, I wish you'd be quiet. That's not going to work, and it's going to kind of end up with a slightly bad feeling. It's a competition between you and the teachers. It can happen, I know, I've done it myself, and each time I thought, I don't think that's going to help. In fact, I think it set everything back a bit. It meant they were quiet, but kind of resentfully quiet. Yeah, so the only way to do it, to get your students to be what you want them to be, is to do it yourself. Okay, you must be all those things. Yes, I'm aware that's really saying you've got to do rather a lot in sometimes very tiring, difficult, exhausting situations. So it's something we're aiming for. Yes, obviously you can't be like that all the time, but you must be all those things as far as you possibly can, because you're the one who's setting the example for the teachers, well, maybe for other teachers, setting the example for the students. Right. And with time, the more you can get to be like that, the more your students are like that. And it all ends up in the end that it's actually much easier for you. And when you're breathing calmly and you're being those things that you want your students to be, and you're getting them involved in these groups, then suddenly things do become a little bit easier. I see somebody said, this is why kids love our classes rather than other subjects. This is absolutely, somebody else has put, true. It's so important that the English class is different. I always felt this is really important when I've been teaching, that the English class is different. I always feel with particularly with the older primary students, that okay, I mean, they like their classes and they like their teachers, but you don't see them kind of getting all excited because it's the maths class. Well, one or two may do, but most of them will not be getting that excited about the maths class. They won't be jumping off because it's, I don't know, another one of their classes. But when it comes to the English class, really what we aim for is them to just be really happy about going to the English class, because so much of the activities are fun. They're talking about fun things, they're writing fun things, they're seeing things that are fun, and they're obviously learning something very useful. That's the main thing. But it's the question of actually really getting them to really enjoy the class, because the English class is different. With adolescents, with teenagers and so on, okay, then they're never going to skip towards the English class. That is just not going to happen. I can't see that. But they might just walk a little bit more, a little bit not quite so slowly to the English class, because even then, at that age, when you're a teenager or whatever, the English class is still different. In some ways, it's becoming more demanding, or much more demanding than it was in primary, but it's still enjoyable. There are still lots of enjoyable activities you can have. And if you've also got a teacher who is all of those wonderful things, kind, enthusiastic, helpful, friendly, etc., 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 then that's the class where you'll behave in a kind and friendly and enthusiastic way. And that's the way it all works so well. Right, so those are three little things that we can do. If you'd like to read a bit more, there's this bloke called Adrian, I don't know how it's pronounced, Bethune. He's an English bloke, he's a teacher. And he has a lot of really good ideas about how to bring classes together. He works sometimes in really quite difficult classes, really quite difficult schools sometimes. He said he tried out his things in some of these really quite upsetting schools sometimes in England. And he's really actually making a big difference. There's a reference there to his website, or one of his many websites. It's also at the list, at the bottom of the list that you're going to get, so you don't need to write it down now. Just a mention that he wants some more ideas. He's got no shortage of ideas, I'll tell you that. Okay, moving on. Oh my goodness, it's taking a long time. Right, teaching style. Now, oh gosh, if I've given talks to other people, I've probably gone on and on about this, but it's something, it's so important. When we talk about our teaching style, it's the way we teach makes a huge difference. And this is something I'm going to always go on about. It's the same point I'm making all the time. Keep the amount you say to a minimum. Now, it's always a problem, because I stand up and I talk for 45 minutes or an hour or 2 hours sometimes, and all the time I'm saying don't talk all the time. So I can see there's a bit of a mix there, but I'm talking about when you're in class, when I'm in class, try not to be talking or giving instructions or whatever all the time, because very often when students are not understanding something, then, okay, they'll listen to your instructions or whatever for a short time. They might understand it a bit, but then if you carry on, boom, that you've lost them completely. They're going to be miles away, and then they won't know what to do with the activity. So perhaps, oh gosh, you might carry on saying more things. And really, once you've got past a certain point, there's no point in saying any more, because it's just not going in. Really, with all these things, keep what you say to an absolute minimum, because you can speak English. Congratulations, that's very useful, wonderful. But your students are the ones who need to speak it, and they don't need to be really listening to something which, firstly, they don't really understand, and secondly, they might not be very interested in just listening to instructions as a general rule. So particularly when you're setting up activities and so on, whoops, sorry, I need to do that. When you're moving activities and so on, then absolute minimum of activity of instructions, and get the students to do an example. Much better. So they actually, two students act out the activity, then everybody knows what to do. It makes a huge difference, absolutely a huge difference. I also think it's a bit of a problem that A lot of teachers often tend to jump into their native language when they're giving instructions. I really think that helps, because very often the instructions in any language, your own language or any others, are very difficult to follow. Really, people only understand instructions if they actually know what the activity is. They know what the activity is, they say, oh, right, I know what that is, yes, okay, and they can do it. If it's something new, it's actually very difficult to listen to instructions and actually then follow it. It doesn't happen that naturally. You've got to see somebody do it. Now, the problem here, I think, why it's so important, is that if you if you tend to say too much, the students do turn off and they go back into their little tribes and so on. And that's actually a bit of a problem, because, as I say, you kind of lost them, actually. And all that wonderful work we're doing, bringing them all together, they kind of, whoa, they fall apart. So basically, get them together, get people from two different tribes, completely different groups, to work out the activity. It's not, they can do it. It's only a short thing. They can do it. And then there you are. The other students can all do it in pairs or whatever, how they're doing it. And that really works as an activity. But spending long times explaining activity, and the group just dissolves away from you. You sometimes see it. So that's, I do think it's really important. That's why I always mention it, and apologies to people who've been to other talks I've been at where I've said pretty much exactly the same thing. It's so important. Right. And the other thing that's very, very important, and teachers perhaps don't do it as much as they could. They always do it when there's an observer in the room, I've noticed. But other times I have a feeling it's not so often, is to move around the classroom. Because otherwise the group becomes like the teacher and lots of little tribes. Whereas if you're moving around, okay, you've actually, the whole class is one, you're kind of watching one whole class pull together. They're not quite so in their little groups, because they don't quite know what's happening behind them, be at the back of the class and so on. Not the whole time, but spend time there. Take it easy at the back of the class, because that's when your students will be really having to work, because they can't be turning around the whole time to see what you're doing. They have to work. And if they're not working, you can see them straight away, but they don't know that you can see them. So there's tremendous advantages in being at the back of the class, I reckon. That's really a great way to just to keep the whole class moving together. It's kind of like one unit moving along. Right, on to the next little bit. This is another bit where I think sometimes we lose students, and as a result, the kind of group begins to unformed, to collapse almost. This wonderful group we've created with our activities to try and bring them all together. And that is with drawing, because a lot of teachers can do really, really nice drawings, and that's great, but do be careful not to spend too much time on them, because a lot of the time students don't really want to see pretty drawings on the board. They want to do an activity with their friends. So if you're doing some beautiful picture of a man talking to a woman, and you'd make the man really handsome and so on, the woman really beautiful and with nice smiles, perhaps a nice glow. It's okay. It's very clever. It's wonderful for the art class, and it's great that you can do that. But it's not really appropriate for the class to spend such a long time with them just watching you draw a picture, and it can happen. It takes quite a bit of time. My little argument there is make your drawings quick and quirky. So quick, you just and quirky. So they're kind of a little bit funny, a little bit crazy, perhaps. Doesn't matter, because nobody's being marked for art here. And I have to say, if I were being marked for art, well, I would never be allowed as a teacher, because that's how I draw my pictures all the time. And I've done that for 20 years now. And I think if I tried, I could perhaps by now be doing much, much better figures. But that's not the point, actually, because the students won't get much enjoyment out of seeing me do attractive pictures of people or things or whatever. Curiously, these are really amateurish pictures, and they're just a bit silly and quirky, a little bit funny, a little bit crazy perhaps, but generally speaking, the students really like them, and that goes for all age groups. They think it's funny. And that kind of sets the whole thing off in a much better way. It's not me saying, look at my beautiful picture. It's actually this crazy picture. And anyway, this is you. And that's quite funny. They like it. This is for setting up role plays. Somebody's put, they are lovely. I know they are not lovely, but what they are is quirky. Yeah, they're quite sort of funny. They're quite appealing. You're welcome to copy that style, should you wish to, but better actually to develop your own quick but cute. Quick but cute. I like that. That's a new one. Yes, a quick but cute style. That's when you got your students right behind you. Right. Moving on. Now, this is a good one, unfortunately, which is causing a bit of a problem when you're in a pandemic. But projecting your voice. Now, let's be, first of all, absolutely clear. Projecting your voice is not the same as speaking loudly, yeah, or shouting, miles away from that. Projecting your voice is using your standard, your usual talking voice to make sure that it gets to people. It's speaking with power and authority when you speak, rather than either perhaps very quietly, you don't want to speak too quietly if you're a bit shy or whatever, or not shouting. That is a no-no, absolutely. Just turns the students off. Right. Oh, I like this. Somebody said he was telling them not to say their fried eggs. Well, that's great, yes. And then they say, oh, the teacher's doing her fried eggs. That's all fine. Right. It's quite nice seeing these. I can't see all the comments because normally I'm not looking, but every now and then I look down. I like the thing about the fried eggs very much. Right. Anyway, back to projecting your voice. Now, there's two problems. First of all, I can't really do it in the situation because we can't do little activities here because I can't see what you're doing. That's why I've suggested you have a look. I've put a little reference there at the bottom to WikiHow, which is one of those wikis that tells you on the internet, obviously, how to do everything. It says project your normal speaking voice. So you're not learning to shout because that's no good, okay? And you're not changing your voice. It's your normal voice, but you're learning how to get it out, right? So it's really gives you that kind of authority almost, but still perfectly normal and acceptable and friendly and so on, but a voice that people listen to, they can hear. So if you're interested in that, sometimes you feel you're a bit quiet in class or your students aren't actually paying much attention to you, or perhaps don't understand sometimes what you say. That's a good reference. They've got lots of little activities. And of course, it's a problem now when you're in a pandemic because we're all wearing those things. I imagine a lot of you are having to actually wear masks and so on in class. Yes, it is a bit of a problem when I've done speaking sometimes to groups. It's only happened once or twice. It is a bit of a problem because inevitably the mask or whatever you put over does muffle your voice a little bit. So in a case like that, you will have to raise your voice, and it's really important not to sound angry. It's doubly difficult, I think, because the students can't quite tell you when they can see your eyes, yeah, can't see your mouth. They don't get a full picture of what your mood really is. So they might think that you're talking very loudly like this, you're actually very angry. And you may not be. Well, I hope you're not. Well, I mean, you're certainly not showing it anyway. So it is rather difficult. And that's actually why it's rather important, in fact, at this stage more than ever, to actually learn to project your voice so that it can get through these layers so that people can actually hear you much better. And it does work, but it does need a little bit of practice. Have a look on the WikiHow and see how it goes. All right, moving on, zooming on. Right. Again, another idea which unfortunately we can't really do when you've got a pandemic and students are isolated, but for later days, or perhaps it could be arranged online, I don't know. It's really nice to have these little walkabouts where you put examples of the students' work on the wall and for a particular project or whatever they've been doing together. And they all stand up and comment nicely, yes, on each other's work. And you might vote for something which is the nicest colors or something which is the longest even. you perhaps try and get votes for ones where people aren't always getting the best vote. It's not always the best that we have to find. It can be the most interesting, the most crazy, the longest. Give a vote for the shortest if you like, because there are no prizes, they're not winning anything, but somehow when anybody who gets mentioned in a positive way in the class, that's just great. Okay. What are we saying? We've got some suggestions here about masks, because there are a bit of a problems. Yes, I agree smiling with the eyes works, but it's quite easy to misunderstand what somebody, because I mean, obviously our eyes do change when we smile. It's quite difficult sometimes to understand what somebody's mood if because people always look slightly different when they've got a mask on. There might also be cases, I don't know in your schools whether that's the case, where the teachers have to wear a great big visor. And there is a problem, I think, with getting your voice out sometimes, and you really could benefit from learning to project your voice a bit. Somebody says their eyes are so cool. I'm sure they are. Right. Okay. So that's just one little idea. It brings a class together, particularly if lots of people are getting congratulations for different reasons, for fun reasons, okay? And you're pulling them all into the class, and they really enjoy their little walkabouts of the gallery. Only a quick activity, 5 minutes at the most, so that everybody goes around and looks at other people's works, and then they go and sit down, and you can talk about it. And everybody's been part of a nice little group. Everybody's been involved. Right, now, oh gosh, we're moving on. We're running out of time. I think I'm going to have to leave some of these things because I do want to get on to something which is really important. Oh, so we've got my calculator back there. Right. Okay, under classroom activities, we can't really go into this in much detail because we're kind of running out of time. The most important thing to bring a class together, absolutely, so that we get all those different groups, those different tribes working together, is to do communicative activities. Those activities where students have got a reason to ask each other questions or describe things and so on, and a reason to answer or give details or whatever. They're actually using English in a really genuine, needy way. But of course, there is always a problem, because to work well, communicative activities have to be short, I think, quick, easy to set up, and enjoyable. And in so many cases, it's not very often any of those things, or some of them are missing. I'm going to jump over these ones because they're not so important. I'm going to jump on to, okay. Going to jump to that and that, right. These are just examples from Share It, from the Communicative Activities book. It's a book which each student has it. So in Student 1, they have their share book with Student 1 activities. Student 1, Level 1 activities, all the way through up to Level 6. That's a primary. But give you some ideas of what the sort of communicative activities that work really, really well. Each student has one, and in some cases, perhaps the students are working in pairs, like this one, where on one page they'll have a picture of people in the park, in this case, or in a garden, I think, and cards of the various people. So what the students do is they look at the picture and they cut up these cards, and then they put the cards face down, and they take turns to pick up a card. And they say, for example, that's Claire to begin with, okay? So the question is, this is, well, what are they doing? Yes. So Claire, what is Claire doing? And the other student is having to look at the page and find Claire, quite a tricky one. She's actually there in the pool, in fact. So say she's swimming. Then the other student picks up one of the cards, they'll face down, so picks them up, sees who it is, asks the question. If the next one is perhaps, I can't see Richard. What is Richard doing? And the first student asks the question. So these are really simple to pick up, and they just work really nicely and well. That's communicative. They're working, asking questions they don't know the answer to. It's really easy. And that way, you can get different groups of people working, different pairs of people working. And here's something which you could actually do if you're doing your classes online, because you can just choose people who aren't even sitting next to each other. It works really well. Right. different activity here. This would be this is rather like Memoria, if any of you play that game. I seem to remember it's very popular in parts of Latin America, including Mexico. You've got students who've got illnesses of different, well, pictures of children who've got different illnesses and recommendations, right? So he should stay in bed, she shouldn't eat candy, etc., etc., etc. And you cut out all the cards, put them face down, and you have to find pairs of cards. You just pick them up one by one. Let's say you pick up the card with the woman with toothache, right? So you've got to try and remember where the toothache advice is, which in this case is she should go to the pharmacy, I would say, yeah, or whatever. So there are various ones which are suitable for them, and you get pairs and you set them down, basically like Memoria. Or it could be something a little bit more, this would be a slightly more advanced level, where you've got, again, it's communicative. One student's got one map, the other student's got a second map, and they're all actually working together to try and find out where everything is. So student A on one side might say, how can I get to the bakery? And student B, who knows where the bakery is, says from the start point, so turn left, walk along the road, it's on your right, or whatever the language is, okay? And that way student A can write down where the bakery is. Then student B asks to find out where one of the other places is that he doesn't have. So that way, again, it's communicative, you're swapping, asking for information, swapping information you have. It all works really well. Now, these are the sort of things that get students working really easily. So if you can find with whatever course you're doing, simple, but really easy to set up and enjoyable communicative activities, that's the way. That's the thing that really, really helps the students, give them confidence and the ability to actually use English rather than just fill in gaps the whole time. All right. Okay. I haven't got much time for anything else, I'm afraid, because we're already at 5, a little bit late already. Right. So that's coming to the end of it. I think we'll have to call that the end. Just to quickly go through the list again of what we've got. So to make the classroom inclusive, to get everybody involved in the action, not to feel kind of not involved in the class at all. We need to be careful about how we interact with the students, and particularly make sure that we can do something at times to break up the little tribes or cliques. Being careful with our teaching style, so it doesn't just mean that, that we're kind of perhaps talking too much or spending too much time on the board and the class just gets lost, the students get wafted away. And classroom activities, particularly communicative activities, those are the ones that really help students to express themselves, to enjoy it, and they can be doing that with anyone from their tribe or not from their tribe. Everybody gets a part, gets involved in it. Right, so that's all I think we have time for now. It's been a bit of a rush. There are other things. When you get a copy of this, you'll see there are actually other activities which I hope you might be able to understand. Let's just move on to the next bit. Good luck with your classes. I'm sure you'll all have a great time and everything will be really good with your students. And join me on Facebook, please, if you can face it. Join me on Facebook. Yeah, it's under Nicholas Beare. That's the teaching one. There is a Nick Beare one, but it's that's more a social one with family and so on. So Facebook with Nick, that's the teaching one, and I'll be putting up later on, not at the moment, but in over the next few months, activities I'm working on, so you can put those there. And I can perhaps try to answer some of your questions, but right, there is a little bit of, goodness, that's one friend request already. That is somebody who works really quickly. Thank you, Gabriella. Right, there are some references there, which might help you with some ideas that can help you along. Right, now, I don't know if we've actually got time for this, but if anybody's got any questions, I might quickly answer a question if we've got time. Have we got time, Anna?
Yes, we do have time to take a few questions.
A couple of questions, right. Let's see. Anybody got any questions or any points you'd like to make? No? Oh, well, that's very kind of you. But I think a little bit. Oh, what if the tribes are higher and lower? Ah, well, that's a very good point there, because this is one of the very difficult areas is the whole thing of mixed abilities. The question is, what can you do with tribes if one is high level and one is low level? Right, very difficult. And this whole idea of mixed ability and so on is problematic, but if you put your finger on it there, it's doubly problematic when you've got, as I was saying, perhaps the clever clogs and the not so clever clogs. And that's a bit of a problem. And this is why you can never really force them to be together, because the really clever ones don't want to spend a lot of time with the not so clever ones, and the not so clever ones feel uncomfortable doing that. We can't push them together. But any simple activity, like the ones I was suggesting, where basically all they've got to do is say, we like hamburgers or we don't like hamburgers, and you adjust it to the sort of level of language they're having. Obviously, later on, it gets more complicated, more advanced, let's say. Simple activities like that are what can pull people together. We're not saying they have to be together all through the class. In fact, definitely not. But I think there must be times when we can get them all to work together on something. Just a very short little activity like that one where the who is like one. The level of the language is quite a bit lower than what the good ones will be capable of, but they'll still be enjoying the activity. And that means everybody's part of the group, and they mixed up the old tribal groups. There are many problems, I think, with the way sometimes that we teach the mixed abilities, and we do sometimes, and I know I've done this before, those who are not so good tend to sort of isolate them a bit and say, right, you can do this activity, yes, while the other people are doing something really exciting and interesting. It can be a bit problematic. We've got to be very careful with that kind of activity, but it's really helped if we actually bring people all together, albeit simple activities, but enjoyable ones, which they'll all enjoy. Right. Okay. I think we might have to stop it there, mightn't we? Because it's actually 4 o'clock.
Great. I have one more question for you, Nick, that was in the chat box earlier. If you don't mind, I thought that was a really interesting question. So because we have mixed abilities, shy students, outgoing students, if we ask a student to answer a question, but they don't want to answer it, what would you do?
That's very tricky, isn't it? Because you think you're being nice and you're including the student, and suddenly you realize that you've actually put them on the spot. And it's very hard to know whether the student simply doesn't know the answer, or the student is terribly nervous, or the student is upset, or sometimes very impossible, very difficult to know what the situation is. I think in a case like that, it's actually better, as soon as you realize that the answer isn't going to come out, to actually change and give them the 2 answers. So if I say to you, I don't know, a question you don't know, I don't, let's give it an example. What is the, let's do something silly. What's the capital of England? Yes, of the United Kingdom. And you're absolutely blank, you see. Would you say it's Washington or London? You see, so you've given them an answer, yes, and that way they'll probably be able to provide the answer to the question. So I think that might work a little bit better if you actually, it means you've got to be really aware of it, because you've got to be aware that the student is having problems, and the only, for whatever reason, doesn't understand whatever. So the only reason going to help is to actually offer the 2 answers. It might be then that nothing happens again. These are the sort of things that can happen. In which case you make nothing of it, no, nothing at all. Or what about everybody else? What do you think? What is the capital of the UK? And then everybody's sort of involved in it. Well, not everybody, some of them won't be interested in doing it. But at least you've got past it, you've got an answer, okay? And you can actually agree with, say to the student, do you agree? Like that. Get them to agree, and then they're all happy, sort of. Yeah, it's a bit of a tricky situation, but it can happen, of course. It's happened to all of us, and I think that's the best way out of it. Yes, try not to draw attention in any way. Just simply provide answers to the individual, then to the group, and then say, isn't that great? Whatever. And moving on to something else.
I very much like that approach, because you're avoiding that the student feels singled out. You're trying to make it inclusive again.
It is a problem, you see, when you're trying to include people, you can actually, if you're not careful, push them out a little bit, and that's a little bit tricky. So as I say, that's, yes, that I think would work. Well, it has worked for me. We'll have to see in other cases.
Some great advice. Thank you, Nick, for your answer.
Well, and thanks to all these lovely people.
Thank you for your inspirational session, for all your ideas, all your practical ideas. Looking at the chat box, it's full with lots of thank yous, appreciation, and lots of motivated teachers. So a huge thanks from all of us for doing this tonight.
Well, that's very, very kind of you. And thanks for all signing up. Yes, and all have your very nice comments as well. Really nice. That's great. Thank you very much indeed.